Catch up with John anytime, anywhere. Listen to Tell Me Everything on demand or on the SiriusXM app. Tell Me Everything with John Fugelsang.
Welcome back. It's been a big week for President Biden at the Asian Pacific Economic Committee Summit in San Francisco. Among the things we've learned that the U.S. will be resuming military-to-military ties with China, which will hopefully make us all safer. We may be accelerating our clean energy transition. In many ways, the big story is that China showed up for the talks at all, and it's a positive step forward. But one area that's getting a lot of notice is an agreement to crack down on production and spread of the drugs that make fentanyl, which could be a key step towards subduing the opioid epidemic. Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy is the representative for Illinois' 8th Congressional District. He serves as the ranking member on the House Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the U.S. and the Chinese Communist Party, and he's generally a rock star in the Democratic caucus. Congressman, it's such a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, John, thanks so much for having me.
I'm glad you're taking a break from all of the physical violence and wrestling matches in Congress. Are you okay? I've been very worried about these insecure, toxic male Republicans this week.
I'm okay, but, we're going to have to either start wearing helmets or carrying around penalty flags because it's starting to get out of hand.
Also, sir, before we get into the APEC, thank you for the government still working. It's really great, and we're very grateful to you and all the adults in the room.
Yes, we have very high standards at this point, so thanks for noticing.
Absolutely. I'm glad your caucus does. So let me begin. What were your thoughts broadly, sir, on President Biden's meetings with Chinese President Xi in San Francisco?
I think it was a good start. I think it was a productive conversation. I think that the agreements with regard to establishing military-to-military communications channels, as well as cooperating to reduce fentanyl shipments, especially from China to Mexico, fentanyl precursor shipments, is good. I also liked that, Xi Jinping engaged in a little bit of pandering, pardon the pun. He's going to be sending a few pandas to the United States, so that's very good. But I would have liked to have heard a little more about the issue of the crackdown on human rights that continues in China, especially with regard to the Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, dissidents of all kinds. And I also wanted to hear more about what steps the CCP was going to take to lower economic aggression. I'm talking about the incessant cyber hacking, the theft of intellectual property, the dumping of goods, and so forth. I'm hopeful that this conversation is going to lead to another conversation where we can have concrete action steps on those issues.
Well, let me break that down and ask you about them point by point, sir, because last year, as you know, more than 109,000 Americans died of overdoses. 73,000 of those deaths were linked to fentanyl. And we know our friends in the Republican Party are whipping this up into a huge moral panic, and they're trying to blame this on the president and have lies about an open border, even though most people who smuggle drugs into the U.S. are Americans. I understand that these precursors to fentanyl are legal to produce and export in China. We don't really yet know, in spite of this agreement, how Beijing would crack down on the local pharma market. I know they sent out a memo saying we don't want you to do this anymore, but is there a concern that the industry is just too fragmented for Chinese authorities to be able to control these chemicals?
I think that our authorities believe that the CCP and local regulators have an understanding of, who's legit, who's not, and then most importantly, what are the kind of end uses or where the precursor chemicals will end up. Now, you're exactly right that there are legal uses or legal purposes for fentanyl. But there's also folks who understand that the precursor chemicals are going to end up with the Sinaloa cartel. Yeah. And the cartel is going to press that into pills that then flood our market. And one thing that you mentioned is very important. This isn't coming across because of migrants. It's coming across through our ports of entry, usually smuggled through vehicles and other means. And so those two issues really are separate for the most part.
India has been designated by the DEA as a growing source of fentanyl precursors. Would you like to see agreements like this with other of our allies and trading partners?
Absolutely. I think we need to, enter into counter narcotics agreements with a number of our friends and partners and others throughout the region. I don't see how it serves any of those governments to look the other way on this particular issue, because, as you know, it boomerangs.
Yeah.
And I think that we should, insist that this be kind of essential in our relationships with other countries at this point.
As you know, Congressman, the problem with these kind of interventions is that they still don't address the demand that's out there for these drugs, especially after an industry has spent a decade getting people hooked on them. Is there a danger that other dangerous lab synthetics could come in to fill the void? Is there a danger we're going after the symptoms and not after root problems?
I think we have to go after both. And you're absolutely correct that with regard to the demand issue, I don't think that we're doing enough in terms of different strategies to kind of deal with people who have addiction, because you can't just arrest your way out of this problem. I've had roundtables and various meetings in my own constituency, in my district, in the suburbs of Chicago, with families and experts on this very topic. And what they tell me is, mental health and substance abuse are twin sides of the same coin. And if you don't address one, you're not going to address the other. Yeah. And on top of that, we have to recognize that there's an element of harm reduction in addition to everything else. One of the proudest things that I've done in Congress is I've actually secured funding for local law enforcement who set up innovative strategies for basically treating addiction among people they've arrested, and then trying to find workforce development opportunities so that they can end up in a job. And, one researcher I was informed said that, one of the best ways that we can reduce addiction is to reduce hopelessness. And one of the best ways to reduce hopelessness is to give people purpose and a mission and a job. And so let's treat all of this at the same time. Finally, I think all of you know the dimensions of the problem. We lost 77,000 people in 1 year, John, to synthetic opioid overdoses, mostly fentanyl. 77,000. That is a horrifying number.
It's incredible. And I think you're exactly right. I think the upcoming generation is a generation that already recognizes that there is no law enforcement solution to this health problem of addiction. So I'm very optimistic and hopeful.
No.
According to the New York Times, the U.S. is going to lift sanctions on China's Forensic Police Institute. That's part of the deal with the support in fentanyl. Now, that is a government entity that's been accused of human rights abuses, including connecting of DNA of Uyghurs without consent. Are these kind of trade-offs worth it, sir? Are these the kind of trade-offs that we just have to expect when we're trying to have better, more normal relations with an adversary?
It's a great question. I think that ultimately, the CCP is responsible for the Uyghur genocide. And at the same time, it's responsible for policing drug interdiction and narco trafficking. If we don't deal with the CCP because they are doing some really horrible things on the one hand, we can't also address these other, pressing matters on the other. And so there are some trade-offs. Although I'm not going to stop pressing on the Uyghur genocide or what's happening with them. We have other means and tools at our disposal that we can talk about it more, but we haven't used those to the utmost in dealing with that issue.
Yeah, and I thank you for keeping a light on that issue all the time, because God knows our corporate media sure doesn't do it. I also want to echo your praise for the return of military-to-military communication between China and the U.S., Congressman. What do people need to know about military-to-military communications between America and China, and why is that something that's so important for world stability?
What I'm very concerned about is some kind of catastrophic incident in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea, where there's an incredible concentration of Chinese naval and air assets and, our and Canadian and other allies and friends and partners assets as well. And until now, at least for the last 1 to 2 years, there has not been any communications at the highest level in the military to, deconflict, to avoid accidents, or if there's an accident, to explain what's going on or to explain intentions. And so this is a way of opening the dialogue, literally having a phone, a bat phone, if you will, a red line that says, look, we're planning to go through the Taiwan Strait today with this ship. It's a routine voyage. It's not anything more than that. And we want you to know ahead of time, that kind of thing. That helps a lot. And I think that the more that they have that dialogue, then we can also talk about other things. I want them to also talk about, for instance, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening with Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah. But you can't have those communications unless you have a dialogue and communications channel.
Absolutely. And Congressman, I think it seems like the real great victory of this summit is that at least we now have the impression that Beijing is open to playing ball with the U.S., that it seems like relations seem warm, and that is the real most tangible victory we can take away from this.
I think it was a good day for the world when the two leaders meet and, there's no Chinese spy balloon that's traversing the United States the next day.
Exactly.
I think that's it's a good thing that we're kind of in that situation. On the other hand, there's still a lot of work to do. I think we have to see actions match the words. Xi Jinping is famous at this point for saying one thing and then saying something different internally. And the New York Times just highlighted this in a long form story last week. So we have to monitor that. But as Joe Biden said, trust but verify. At this point, we have to see what his actions are.
And I think I'd love to get your comments, Congressman, on Joe Biden's comment when asked if Xi was a dictator. I think if he had said, no, he's not a dictator, he would have been accused of being dishonest. How did you feel about the president's candor in that moment? Well,
he was speaking truth. He was repeating what he's already said. This is not new. On the other hand, I think that probably there are some people out there who would prefer that he not use that exact language. But on the other hand, he's just saying what he said before. And, the Chinese know what he said before, and we've still had progress in terms of having these talks. I think at the end of the day, these types of words, these types of issues are important, but not as important as the substance of kind of our relationship and how do we actually lower economic and military aggression by the CCP.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Congressman, again, I want to thank you for all your work to avoid a government shutdown and keep our society functioning. I'm really fascinated by what it's like for you and your Republican colleagues across the aisle. I'm sure that every day you must deal with conservative brothers and sisters who are deeply embarrassed by all of this, and are there must be a deep sense of frustration that it is continually a right-wing element in their party that is slowing down any progress. Is that, without naming names, is that sort of a vibe you get from your colleagues?
Yes, I do, and I don't know what it's going to take for them to speak up, because they don't, and the longer that they don't, the longer they're going to see. For instance, Donald Trump the other day, used what I thought was kind of Nazi vernacular to describe his opponents. I think he said something to the effect of the left are vermin and need to be eliminated, or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. I apologize.
No, that's what he said. Yes, sir.
Exactly, but that's what I kind of heard.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff is dangerous, man. I mean, you go down that road. It's a very dark road, and I think he is playing right into the rhetoric that white supremacists use. And by the way, that is what stokes the violence. It's the political violence. We're seeing the rise of political violence, not just January 6th being the kind of the best example of it, but we're seeing it every day in different forms. And so we've just got to turn a different direction. I'm hoping